My pleasure. Reverend, didn't get a chance to talk to that.
Yeah, I just got here. I'm doing well. Thank you for allowing me to come and share who's in this process. You've been laboring for a number of years. Well,
Let me try and explain the ground rules to you real quick.
yes.
I'll make an opening. We have three speakers here from the Missouri School Board Association. They will give a presentation on elected boards. At the conclusion of their presentation, we will then have this panel ask any questions that you want to ask, one at a time.
Okay.
And once you've asked the question, if you can clarify in support of that, you can then do that. But if
Hello
you want
there.
a question all the way through,
Still alive.
then you will have the right to
Thank you.
second question.
Some days that's what you
Once
do.
you've completed asking your
Some days you're
question,
really tired.
we will open it up to the audience, and they will be able to ask one question. They'll have a time limit, question or comment of 3 minutes. That's the time you give. So we can
Hey,
the amount of
how you
time.
doing?
Asking their questions
You doing
to
all right?
yes or to us.
We'll be asking questions.
I will.
To the guest speakers.
Is she?
So we're
She's a good one.
essentially recording, gathering information so we can make a decision.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Rhodey.
I'm down. Look, watch your step there. We got this out here to trip somebody up.
It's great to see you.
Ladies.
Thanks so much for allowing us to be here.
How are you? I'm going to introduce the three of you at the same time in my just opening comment. I would assume you know who's going to speak first, second, and third, because then it's up to you. The questions they will ask, if they are questions related to elected boards, will be answered only by you. We're not here to answer those questions. So you will have to take the heat on us when you answer. Right? But to give guidance to the process, they'll ask the question to you. I will moderate. So if we have a problem with someone going through long will be my responsibility, not yours. These things here are monitors. So each person will be allowed to either ask a question or make a comment. Either or both, no more than 3 minutes. After they've made that, I will give them the opportunity to make a clarifying question if they didn't quite understand the answer. That's the general audience. We will first start, however, with the panel. The panel, which is seated here, will ask the first round of questions of you. And you then answer them. Same thing with a follow-up. The difference will be if they have more than one question, they will have a chance to ask two, but not sequentially. They'll ask one and go down the line, and if someone else has not asked the other question they want to ask, they'll be given a chance to ask the second question. Okay?
No, we will finish our PowerPoint and then the questions will start. Is that right?
We have allocated, and I'll mention that in his opening remarks, between 30 and 35 minutes for your PowerPoint presentation, following which I'll open it up to questions. Your presentation will be done from here. Your answering of questions will be done from the podium.
Okay.
Okay?
There's supposed to be a clicker for the PowerPoint, and that's it? That looks like it might be it.
Would Lorna Godwin please come to the stage?
You think that's it?
Yeah, I want to make sure you have knowledge of how to use this. Would Lorna Godwin or someone who knows how to use a PowerPoint please come to the stage? You're going to be a lucky man. You're going to show these three beautiful ladies how to use this.
The green button is forward. Okay. This red one is the back button. Okay. If you touch this, you're going to hit this one as a blank out button. Yeah, we won't do that. And I'm scared of the red one. That one's a little different. Oh, no, I don't need that. Okay.
We got it.
Forward.
This one's forwards, this one's back.
Okay, that I can do. You have a couple.
You all ready?
Mr. Gaines.
Mr. Gaines.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. I would like to call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My name is Richard Gaines, and I am a member of the St. Louis Public Schools Special Administrative Board and the chair of the Special Committee on Governance, reviewing the district's governance options. As well, I would also like to recognize Mr. Rick Sullivan and Ms. Donetta Klinkskill, fellow members of the SAB. Okay, Rick may still be swimming his way down here. Oh, it's over here. I would also like to acknowledge any members from DESE who may be here this evening, right down front, and any other elected officials that may be in the audience. Are there any here this evening? Senator Nasheed, any other elected officials? As you may know, Senate Bill 781 of Missouri law. Who else did we have? Any others? As you may know, Senate Bill 781 of Missouri law charges the Special Administrative Board with the task of reviewing the exploration of alternative forms of governance for the St. Louis School District. We realize this is one of the last major responsibilities we must accomplish before we complete our service to the children and families of this city. With that in mind, we have taken great care to form a diverse special committee with representation from key stakeholder groups across our community that will attend a series of public meetings on the topic of school board governance. The primary purpose of these meetings is to inform the special committee as fully as possible on three possible methods or models of school board governance: elected, appointed, and hybrid models. Armed with this information, the committee is charged with making a recommendation to the SAB for the most appropriate model for St. Louis Public Schools moving forward. After tonight's meeting on elected board governance, we will hold two more meetings, one for each remaining topic. On this Thursday, November 9th, we will meet at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School to hear about appointed board governance from Dr. Kenneth Wong of Brown University. And then next Monday, November 13th, we will meet at Northwest High School to hear about hybrid board governance from Michael Casserly of the Council of Great City Schools. All of our meetings will begin promptly at 6:30 p.m. and will be broadcast live on the district's Facebook page. The format for each meeting will be as follows: a 30 to 35-minute presentation by the guest speaker, followed by questions from the special committee. Following that, we will take any and all questions and comments from the public. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes. This time allowance will be strictly adhered to for the benefit of allowing everyone who wants to comment an opportunity to do so. Those who do not wish to make a comment publicly can also speak directly to a court reporter in the next room. As you go out of the building, there's a room to your left where a court reporter will be there to take any comments from those who may choose not to speak publicly at this meeting this evening. You may also leave a comment electronically or on a comment form in the vestibule just outside this room. As you came in, you would have seen some people outside sitting at some tables that have iPads and the like, wherein you can register your comment or question. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to take a minute to introduce the members of the special committee. Mrs. Addie Bond, a parent of 3 elementary children in one of our district neighborhood schools. Ms. Charlie Cooksey, representing the St. Louis Elected School Board. Mr. Ray Cummings, representing the Teachers Union, AFT Local 420. Our next committee member is a new addition. James Clark from Better Family Life was originally named to the committee, but this morning he resigned with the following words. In response to the recent spike in gun violence in the St. Louis metropolitan area, I have been asked to serve on a special action-oriented task force that will begin meeting this morning. I was honored to be asked to serve on the task force to decide the future governance of the St. Louis Public Schools. However, I am much more aligned and involved with the crisis of gun violence/crime. Mr. Clark is replaced by Ms. Stephanie Hudson, an attorney and professor of law at St. Louis University and Lindenwood University. And I want to thank Ms. Hudson for agreeing to participate on such short notice, as in this morning. Pastor Mike Jones, senior pastor of Friendly Temple Baptist Church. Mr. Rich McClure, retired president of Uni Group and former co-chair of the Ferguson Commission. Mr. David Meredith, a parent of 2 high school children in one of our district magnet schools. Mr. Adolphus Pruitt, executive director of the St. Louis chapter of the NAACP. And Ms. Rolanda Layton, former teacher of the year and a teacher at Clancy Miller Career Academy. Thank you all for accepting this role without hesitation. Your work has the potential to impact many generations, future generations of St. Louisans. And now I would like to introduce our speakers on the topic of elected board governance. I would also like to point out that all of the speakers' full biographical information, as well as detailed information about this process, is all available online at www.slps.org/governance. With that said, with us tonight we have Virginia McClotta Jacobs, Executive Strategic Advisor in Equity Programming for the National School Boards Association in Washington, D.C. Ms. McClotta Jacobs is an attorney with over 25 years in public service working with urban education systems, governmental agencies, and labor unions. Melissa K. Randall, Executive Director of the Missouri School Boards Association and the Chief Executive Officer of the MSBA Future Builders Foundation. Ms. Randall is a school law attorney and executive with over 23 years of experience advocating on behalf of public school children in Missouri. She is a wife and mother with 5 grown children who are all graduates of Missouri's public schools. And finally, Ms. Janet Tilley, Director of Board Development for the Missouri School Boards Association. Ms. Tilley has served in public education for nearly 40 years as a teacher, administrator, counselor, and trainer. She joined the Missouri School Boards Association in 2013 as the Director of Board Development and assists in providing the state-mandated training for all public school board members in Missouri. In addition, Ms. Tilley has worked extensively with the boards of the St. Joseph and Kansas City public school districts in implementing research-based governance practices as well as an evidence-based superintendent evaluation process. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Gaines, and members of the Long-Term Governance Special Committee Task Force, members of the elected board and the appointed boards, and Dr. Adams for the opportunity to be here with you this evening. I'm Melissa Randall. I'm Executive Director of the Missouri School Boards Association. I'm going to bring a few comments, and then my colleagues, you've already heard their bios, they're going to be able to share some research with you tonight about elected school board members, and then we look forward to having a dialogue with you. You know, I just have to tell you, it is so exciting to be part of a conversation about how best to serve all of our children and to see the commitment that is here in St. Louis to serve all of our children. And we cannot get distracted from that common goal that unites us. Over the coming weeks, we're going to have some conversations. Some of it you're going to agree with, some of it you may not agree with. But I hope that we can all stay focused on what's most important and what does unite us, and that our future depends on this, that we get it right for the 23,000 plus children that we're serving in this very important school district. You know, governance of the school district matters. Good governance lays the foundation for a strong school system, and weak governance will challenge the ability of the school system to meet the needs of our children. Tonight we're going to talk about the role of the elected school board as a form of governance. School boards across the country govern. We have 15,000 school boards that govern our school districts throughout the country, and they are responsible for the well-being of 52 million children. In Missouri, we have 518 school boards. 515 are elected, and we have 3 appointed right now, who are responsible for the education of nearly 900,000 children. That is an awesome responsibility, and one we take, all of us, take very seriously. You wouldn't be sitting here tonight on a very busy time of year if you didn't care about the governance of this school district, and I thank you so much for that. Elected school boards are the most common form of governance, as I mentioned, public schools, and they represent one of the most purest forms of democracy we have in our country. And let me explain what I mean by that. School board members in Missouri do not run on a partisan platform. They are not beholden to a political party. They are not paid. In Missouri, school board members aren't paid. So when they put their name on the ballot as an elected board member, they are running to serve children. They are held accountable by the community they serve for ensuring a quality education for all children, and they're held accountable at the ballot box. MSBA, the Missouri School Boards Association, has been working with St. Louis and other school districts for over 6 decades. We're a nonprofit association, just to give you a little bit of background of who we are, and we work with most of the school boards, school districts around the state. In fact, we represent 94% of the children we serve in Missouri. We provide guidance on governance and board policy, advocacy, and school law. And as I mentioned, we are created by and governed by school boards. MSBA, along with our national association, National School Boards Association, who are lucky to have a representative here with us tonight, we're pleased to share with you a brief overview of the governance as represented by elected school board service. We'll attempt to keep our overview to about 35 minutes or less to save enough time for any kind of questions or comments that you may have for us or for the task force. And without further ado, I'll have some comments at the very end, but I'd like to bring to the podium two experts actually. I'm going to introduce both of them and then they can follow each other. But Virginia McCotter-Jacobs is from the National School Boards Association. She flew in today from Washington, D.C. She has experience in dealing with the kinds of issues that we're talking about here in Missouri. She served as board president of one of the largest school districts in the country, Prince George County in Maryland. She has served in various capacities in her role as a school board member, including president of the Council of Urban Boards of Education. And so she's going to share some thoughts with us, and she'll be here to answer questions. And then we have Janet Tilley, who Mr. Gaines has already introduced as well, who has spent many, many years working on education issues, and specifically the last few years working on governance issues with elected school boards. So I'm very pleased to allow both of these individuals to spend a few minutes giving an overview of elected school board service, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Virginia?
Good evening. Thank you, Melissa. Let me just first say, first of all, I'm honored to be here to serve your community in this capacity and be able to answer some questions from the National School Boards Association. The National School, I don't know, do I have the clicker? Oh, here it is.
I'll do it for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
The National School Boards Association is the leading public advocate for public education in this country. And the reason why that's important is because we have 4 key areas that I'll quickly go through that I think is critical to local school board governance. We deal with school law issues, And in doing that, we try to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of every single thing that's happening in school law across the country. We have federal legislative priorities. We believe strongly in public engagement. We believe that through the local governance process, the public is intimately engaged and involved in the education of our students. And then the reason why I'm here tonight is because of the support that we provide to the state associations. So the state associations across this country belong to NSBA, as well as the Virgin Islands. And when I say to you that when the call comes for the national organization to come, we want to come to your community because we want you to know that we're here to support you. I served 10 years as a board member, and I can tell you that I understand the challenges that we face, not just in school boards in general, but I served in an urban district. So we have some urban and urban-like situations and challenges that are unique. So the Council of Urban Boards of Education, which is the urban arm of the National School Boards Association, also provides specific support designed for school districts who need the extra support for their board in terms of how to develop policies, how you vote on your budget, specific to issues and challenges in urban districts. I would also say that we believe emphatically that public education and education for every single child is a civil right, and we fight for you and we fight for our children in that regard. So we're your national office. We are in Washington, D.C., and every year we try to make sure we have a legislative agenda that is designed specifically for that. When I served 10 years on the school board, 6.5 of those years I served as board chair. And at the time, it was the 18th largest school district in the country. I also served in a hybrid board. So I've served as an elected board member, and I've also served on a 14-member hybrid board. So I'm here to answer questions that you may have, here to support the community from the National Schools Boards Association, and to let you know that on behalf of our CEO, Tom Gensel, you have our full support. In whatever direction you decide to go, we're here to support you.
I begin tonight with your mission statement, because what unites absolutely all of us in this room is this statement. And so as this task force begins this examination of the various forms of governance for your school boards and for your children, it's important to keep front and center what is foundational to this endeavor, and that is that the St. Louis Public Schools will provide a quality education for all students and enable them to realize their full intellectual potential. I'm going to share a lot of research with you tonight, and I just want you to know that while you cannot see all of our references at the bottom of our slides, that our staff has put together for you an annotated bibliography that will be posted along with this PowerPoint and other documents to help support you, and especially to support the task force as they move forward in trying to find what is the best form of governance for the children in St. Louis. But I'm going to start with this graphic. And this graphic, or this pie chart, looks at the percentage of elected school boards across all 50 United States and Washington, D.C. And what you can see here from what's shaded in pink with the 59% indicates to you that in 59% of our states across the country, we have all locally elected school boards. It is the most common method or formation of governing schools. Along with that, in kind of the purple area, there's an additional 19% of our states. And in those 19%, you will find that the majority of them are still locally elected school boards with certain isolations, such as large urban areas where there may be some appointed boards. The appointed boards will come in, and the hybrid boards will come in the green, the yellow, and the gray. And what you will see with the 10% and the 4% is that in the 10%, this is where about 10% of our states have kind of a 50-50 split between those boards that are all locally elected and appointed. In 4% of our states, you will find then that most, or primarily most of the boards within those states are appointed by elected or governmental officials. And in 8%, you will find that there is mayoral control within those states, or in fact, if you go into Hawaii, There is no school board because there's just one central district amongst all of the islands. I then wanted to step back and say, okay, then what does it look like in urban areas across the United States? And this is a study that came from the Council of Great Cities Schools, and you will be hearing from them next week, I believe. But in a study that they did, what they looked at were 40 of our largest urban areas across the country. And again, they found that the most common form of governance was in fact the locally elected school boards. 15% were primarily appointed within those 40, and then only 3% then had kind of a combination of elected and appointed. We show you this data to step back and to say there's a reason why in St. Louis and in other cities across our state we have locally elected boards, and that is because that's the most common form of school board governance. And in a few minutes, I'm going to share with you kind of the historical perspective as to why that is the case. So if we step back, then what we know then is this, and that is that 96% of the school districts have elected boards, and that includes the 2/3 of our 25 largest cities. This is a result of our history. The progressive era, the progressive movement became kind of a movement in the early 20th century. That was a time in our history of great political machines you would have heard of with Boss Tweed and others. And what they found at that particular time is that most school boards were appointed by usually mayors or other elected officials, and they were kind of cush appointments. And so what would happen then during the time of the progressive movement is that we pushed back and we said, no, we want local control of the education of our students and our children. And so what happened then is that there was this huge shift across the entire country of moving from those appointed boards to elected boards to be able to provide that local control. This helped to insulate then those appointments from any kind of political influence. The other thing that's important to note with the progressive era is that they moved the elections to what we call off-cycle. So this is why you vote for your school board members in April, not during, November types of elections. The other thing, in order to insulate it from the political influence, is that they made it nonpartisan. And Melissa has alluded to this, but normally if I'm going to run for mayor or president or whatever, I have to say I belong to the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. That is not the case with school board members, at least within the state of Missouri. We still hold to that they are nonpartisan. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Remember that button you told me not to hit? Who are you, my friend out there? Yeah, he's hiding from me now. Okay, he's going, I told her not to touch that. All right. Melissa already gave you some of this particular data that we have 515 districts, locally elected, school boards. St. Louis is special. And St. Louis is, by statute, what we call metropolitan, meaning you are not within a county. You are St. Louis City. We then have some school districts that by law are determined to be what are called urban. And you're going to see that they are in Kansas City primarily, except we do have Columbia and Springfield there. The urban determination is made by the concentration of population within a square mile area. And then we have the other, which will be all the other 900 bajillion school districts that we have within the state of Missouri. Not exactly 9 bajillion, but close sometimes. All of them are governed by statutes, and those statutes are very specific about the qualifications you have to have in order to run for school board, kind of governing school board ethics, especially in terms of nepotism and conflict of interest. There are also statutes about terms for school board members, and then also the mandated training that is required within the state of Missouri. You also have 3 specially appointed boards. Specially appointed boards from the state come into play because of 3 different reasons. Number 1 is continued poor student performance or academics. The second reason is usually financial instability. And then the third one is ineffective governance of the board, the team, those kinds of things going on within the district. The three specially appointed boards that we have within the state of Missouri are here, obviously in St. Louis, Normandy, and then Riverview Gardens. So let's talk about the research then behind elected boards. This is just a summary slide, and so what I want you to know is that there really is research behind each one of these core bullets. I'm going to take each one in turn for just a moment, but please know by looking at the bibliography that we are going to provide to you, you can go back to our original sources and look to see what the further research says. But these are the four core things that we know about elected boards based upon research. And that is, first of all, that it models the democratic process. And it models that process for our children as well. Because students will know that the people who are governing them are people who have to be elected by the community. It increases naturally the stakeholder and community interest and then engagement, two different things, within their particular schools. It allows for more direct accessibility of our families to those officials who are making the policies regarding the education of their children. And then the other thing, again, that we've talked about with it being nonpartisan, it allows for that greater independence to act in the best interest of our children and away from political influence. So let's talk about the first one. Melissa talked about there are actually probably more than 13,600 school districts. I believe now we're really at about 14 or 15, if I'm not mistaken. But we do know that there are 90,000 school board members. And we know then of that 90,000 that 86,000, a little over of them, are elected school board members. Within the state of Missouri, that's a little over 3,500 of our elected school board members. I want to talk to you about this graphic for just a moment. And if you cannot see the percentages, I'm going to share them with you as I talk you through this slide. One of the main criticisms about elected school boards is that you have such a low turnout of your registered voters casting their ballots for school board elections. And normally what they will quote to you is that it's about 5%, 5 to 7, maybe 5 to 10% of the registered voters who will come out and vote for school board members. St. Louis is different. And so what I did is that I went back and I pulled the data for the last 10 years on your municipal elections. And what you will find beginning in 2007 is that 6.9%, about 7%, the national average, came out to vote in that particular year for your elected school board members. Now, that year is significant because, as you recall, that was the year that the St. Louis public schools were taken over and given a specially appointed board. We know that that board, by statute, was put into place for a minimum of 6 years. Even though this board, these elected school board members knew that they would not have control or authority, we still had about 7% of the constituents of registered voters come out to vote. You will see then that it goes up and it goes down, but I wanted to note about 2013 and then 2017. Those were the years that you were also electing mayors. In 2013, you had 12.5% of your registered voters coming out to vote for your school board members and your mayors and your aldermen and so forth. Again, in looking at the data that is there, that 12.5% were 12.5% of the voters who were giving their say as to who they wanted to be mayor or continue to be mayor, and also who they wanted to serve on the school board. Now, I know that in 2017, you elected a new mayor, and that, of course, naturally would draw out additional voters. But again, in looking at that data, you will see that 30% or 30.1% of the registered voters cast their vote for both mayor and for the elected school board members. When I looked at that particular data again, I wanted to see if there was some disparity. Were there more people voting for mayor than they were for school board? And that was not the case. It was the same amount for both. So I want you to know that as far as the democratic process is concerned, that St. Louis is different, has been different for the last 10 years than other communities in the interest of their voters in coming forth in elections. So it increases the stakeholder engagement, obviously, then. We've seen that with your registered voters coming out to vote. But elected school board members, what the research has shown from these 3 different studies is the fact that it represents the entire community. In St. Louis, you were divided, I know, into wards. The same thing is in Kansas City as well. And school board members are elected from those wards or then elected at large. It is also an avenue for racial and ethnic minorities to begin to enter into elected community service. It's the most common form for the racial and ethnic minorities to enter into this work. And according to some research from the National School Board Association, in our large districts, what you will find is that the makeup of the school boards is about 22% African American and 6% Hispanic. And so as Diane Ravitch, who's quite the researcher on public education, says that this really ensures the involvement of the public in public education. These 2 studies, one by Frederick Hess out of the University of Virginia, and then the other one by Ruth Miskovich, who is out of Rutgers University, points to these 3 key factors. That elected school board members allow taxpayers and parents to choose those whom are making the decisions regarding their children. Because of that, the elected school board members have an increased responsiveness to their stakeholders, and it allows for increased opportunities for the public to enter into discussion, but especially criticism. And so you ask school board members who try to go to shop at Target or go to the grocery store and find themselves waylaid by someone in the produce section who has a concern about their children. It is a common factor because they are a part of the community and are out in the community and the areas that they represent. It allows for greater accessibility than of the stakeholders. We have hit this point several times about the fact that they are nonpartisan, but because of that, it gives an you are more accountable to your stakeholders. And as Melissa pointed out, these are unpaid positions. There are some states, believe it or not, where the school board members do receive a stipend or a salary, but that is not the case within the state of Missouri. That being said, there are challenges to being a part of a governance group. And these challenges are not unique to elected boards. They really are unique to all boards. But I want to take each one of them in turn and again kind of talk to you about the research that is behind each one of them. One of the first things that makes it very difficult is the fact that you have to serve as a team and not an individual. In giving our training to our new school board members, this is one of the first things we talk about, that you are elected to a governance team. With that, then, comes the fact that it requires balanced leadership, and balanced leadership is a trifold. What happens is that the board has responsibility for governance leadership. They are the ones who determine the what. What is the mission? What are our goals? What is our direction? What's our vision for our children? It is then the superintendent and his central office staff or her central office staff to do the administrative kind of governance and leadership. They are the ones who determine the how. How are we going to do this? How are we going to meet these particular goals? The people who should not be left out of this equation, however, fall into that third category, and that will be the classroom teachers. Your classroom teachers, your building principals, they are the ones who provide operational leadership because they make it happen every single day in the classroom with our children. The other thing that is difficult is about maintaining unity and focus. And that's because of many increasing demands that I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. And the other one is we operate in a very dynamic and uncertain political climate and culture. So let's look at these. The very first one, in talking about no individual board authority, that is established by case law. In fact, it was a case here in Missouri. And in that particular case, it says that unless otherwise authorized by the board, individual members are not empowered to act and cannot govern. This is further supported by your own St. Louis Public School board policies. And board policy B9270 delineates the fact that you govern as a team. And then further, going back to that balanced leadership approach, there are 3 then other board policies that talk about the fact that the board then delegates to the superintendent for that administrative leadership. We know that No Child Left Behind, and then its successor of Every Student Succeeds Act, has brought accountability to the forefront. And we know that even in our own state, we have kind of our accountability system of MSIP 5, which is soon to be, we know, MSIP 6 at some time in the near future. But that increased national, state, and those national and state demands that we have again made it difficult to maintain that unity and focus in achieving our mission. Financial challenges. When I looked at, again, posted on the St. Louis Public Schools webpage, was a delineation of your budgets. And in this last year, St. Louis lost over $12 million in funding, from the state and the national and the federal and the local level. That poses and makes it more difficult to keep that unity and that focus. Obviously, the other is the increased social and political issues. We cannot ignore what poverty does to our children. And the increased poverty and what is called income inequity, in other words, those larger gaps between those who are making a lot more money and those who are making so much less, is continuing to grow. And when I looked at the poverty data for St. Louis in 2014, you had 29.3% of your families living at or below the poverty level. That means $25,000 per year for a family of 4. Now that number has reduced somewhat in the last years or 2, but not by much. And along with that then, we know that those children bring with it those trauma-related issues that are associated with poverty. And the other thing that we cannot ignore and that makes it difficult are the mental health issues, not just of our children, but their families, and then the mental health issues and needs of our staff. So, I want to point to 4 key research studies that show a positive correlation between effective governance of elected boards and student performance. What that means is that correlational means that because these particular school boards were acting and using certain key principles and practices, it influenced, not caused, but influenced then positive upward trends in student performance. These first 4 studies who are listed here are ones that were done predominantly on school boards, only on school boards. I don't mean predominantly, only on school boards. And the majority of those school boards were elected boards, not all of them, but the majority of them were. The last study, which also was done for the Council of Great City Schools, was one that was done not specifically on school boards. It was done on 3 urban districts, 3 urban areas, where they found significant improved student performance and closing of achievement gaps. And what they did is, what they found is that those particular districts, their school boards practiced certain effective governance practices. They implemented them. And in fact, those were the same practices that were outlined in those 4 other core studies. So I want to share with you what those practices are. Number 1, the primary focus of these effective school boards, where we found a correlation to positive increases in student performance, is that number 1, their discussion, their focus, and their work was around students and children. They kept at the forefront their mission and their vision, and they made sure that the things that they were talking about, that they were discussing, that was a part of their board meetings, was about student learning and student performance. Along with that, then, they had clearly established a vision and a mission and goals for that district. And it was done collaboratively. It wasn't someone in a room somewhere who came up with some nice sounding goals. It was done with the stakeholders. It was done with the children. It was done with the board. It was done with the district staff. But what was extremely important or significant is what I was trying to say about those particular goals is that they were measurable. They weren't just pie in the sky, gee, I want peace and love for all the world. They were measurable goals around student performance, student achievement, the district culture, and moving forward. The other thing we know about those boards is that they understood the importance of fulfilling their board responsibilities. Number one, they all acted as a whole board and individually in ethical and legal manners. It is very easy to pick up the newspaper and to read about boards behaving badly. It's easy to do. But these boards knew that they had to be ethical and legal in their behaviors. The other is that they were policy focused. They maintained current policies, and they actually read their policies, and they used their policies. Whenever there was discussion, the primary question was, do we have a policy about this? What does the policy say? Did we follow our policy? Because they knew how important that was, that they were all unified in how they approached their discussions and their decisions. The other, they practiced balanced leadership. They knew they had to delegate authority to the superintendent, but they also knew the importance of being able to monitor district performance. The other thing that was noted about these particular boards is that they had respectful and collaborative relationships with each other, with the superintendent, and with the staff. And what it made it easy for that to happen is because they were practicing all the things that I listed previously. They all knew that even though they may disagree with each other, the one thing they were united on, children. They knew that they had to be policy focused. They knew that they needed to follow their board ethics policies. They engaged in two-way, reliable, and representative communication with all stakeholders. They knew how to push information out, but they also knew how to pull information in from all stakeholders. And the other is that they knew that they didn't know it all. And they understood that they had to continually engage in professional development and training to help strengthen their governance practices. So, that leads me to this particular point. One of the things that we were asked to look at and to help provide some information on is about transition from an appointed board to an elected board. And when I sat back and I looked at the myriad of studies, research, information that was out there, I really kind of saw that it kind of sifted into really 4 different categories. And I'm going to talk briefly about these areas. It is the Taskforce responsibility to be able then to identify which is the best form of governance that they see in moving forward. And so I would highly encourage them to spend more time than what we have this evening on each one of these different states and these districts to see how they are moving forward. The one thing that I will tell you that unites all of these, however, is that everything was done incrementally. It was not that on Monday I have the specially appointed board, and on Tuesday now I have the elected board or a hybrid board or some kind of board from there. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the incremental steps that they took. One of the first categories is that you can go from a fully appointed board to a fully elected board. But again, there were some incremental steps in helping with that particular transition. And I point to the school district that Ms. Jacobs is from, and she can answer probably more questions about this in just a moment. But in Prince County, Maryland, from 2002 to 2013, they were a fully appointed board. They then went back to a fully elected board. And then within 2000 and something, 13, okay, then by legislative mandate, they were then created for her particular county into a hybrid board. One that I found very interesting was one that happened in Logan County, West Virginia. And this, you can see, was in the early to mid-90s. And what happened there is that they decided that they weren't going to do an either or, they were going to do a together. And so the appointed board and the elected board continued to govern together through these 4 years. And the thinking behind this was that when it was time to transition back to the elected board, then they would already know what were the key issues of the district. They would know what was going on financially. They would know some of those particular things that they would need to know in order to take over governance. And they continue to be, in that particular county, an all-elected board. And when I went back again to look at how their student performance is doing, and this is a very poor district, but they were maintaining their student performance even now at or a little bit below the state average. In mathematics, they were continuing to struggle, especially at the high school level. The other two are ones that are occurring really now, and that will be incremental governance responsibilities. And what happened with Fayette County, West Virginia, they were taken over by the state in 2011, and then in 2016, they were given most of the responsibilities back except for financial, because that was one of the reasons that they were taken over in the first place. Within this past year, they've been able to demonstrate that they have the ability to handle the finances of the district, and they've just recently been given full control back to the elected board. Newark is a whole new story. And in Newark, what happens there within the state of New Jersey, just like what we have with MSIP 5, how we have different categories, we have student performance, we have subgroup of performance, we have different areas of accountability. In Newark, from there, they have these categories. They have operational control, they have fiscal control, personnel, governance, and then instructional. And what happened then beginning in 2007, just really the year that they were taken over by the state, they were given what was called operational control. In about 7 more years, they were given fiscal control. In 2016, they got control back over personnel. And then in 2017, in September, they received governance and instructional programs control, now full control. And they are working together with their State Department on a transition plan back to local governance. Staggered replacement of appointed members. These 2 districts, one of them in Mississippi and one of them in Connecticut, still have sort of a hybrid board of where some were elected and some were appointed. But those who had served on that appointed board were incrementally replaced by elected members from the community. And so that's how they moved into that transition. All right, I'm going to let Melissa kind of close this out here, and then please know that any questions that you have in just a moment, that any one of the 3 of us for our illustrious committee, okay, we'll be happy to answer for you and for you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. And Janet shared a pretty comprehensive overview of the governance of school districts through an elected school board. We do have additional research that and a bibliography of some of the research that she pulled together for this particular presentation. I think has been made available also on your site. The challenge before you will be to evaluate and recommend the structure that best serves your students and represents the values of the St. Louis community. And if you're looking for a perfect model that will not ever have any challenges, quite quite frankly, I think you're going to be frustrated. What we need to encourage each other to do is be willing to invest in a proven model that best represents the values of your community. And some questions you might want to ponder as you consider this. What model allows your community voices to be heard? What model ensures accountability and transparency? And what model limits partisan influences and focuses on serving all children? And so as you're debating and you're considering these things, those are some of the issues to take into consideration. But the most important thing that we cannot ever let us disregard is what you've articulated in your mission statement. This is what unites us as a district and a community, and you've said it very, very well in what you've embraced in your mission statement. St. Louis Public Schools will provide a quality education for all students and enable them to realize their full intellectual potential. I thank you for allowing us to be with you this evening and to give a quick overview of the governance of school districts through elected school board service, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Gaines in the committee, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
This will represent the second stage of this evening's meeting, and that will be questions that will be directed towards the guests by the task force that sits here with me. The process will be as follows. Each task force member will be allowed a maximum of 2 questions, but they will be asked 1 question at a time. At the conclusion of that question that they ask, and the response that they get, if they want a clarifying position, they can ask the speaker to clarify any points that they may not have well understood. We are now open for questions from the task force. Please raise your hand so I can acknowledge you.
So you mentioned how there is effectiveness under elected boards. I didn't necessarily hear you compare that to appointed or hybrid boards. Do you have the data on how it compares?
I do. However, the charge that we were given this evening was to remain somewhat neutral and just to present the research of the facts about elected boards. In some of the research studies that are in our bibliography, and I can share some of those with you that I think will help to point to those. One of them is the study by Ruth Miscavige out of Rutgers. Now, what she looked at primarily was mayoral control, and what she was able to find is that while there are studies on both sides, is that there is no causal link between having a mayoral or appointed board and increased student performance. That really what matters is an effective superintendent and is an effective classroom principals and effective teachers in every classroom. And that was the key point. The other research sometimes that is pointed to is a research, and I think you will hear from him later this week, that from Wong and Shen, I believe, out of Brown. And what they did is that they looked at 104 urban cities that had mayorally appointed boards. Now, they did not do a comparison study. They did not look at cities that did not have mayoral appointed boards. And they looked only at NAEP data. NAEP data is national data, but it's only for 4th grade in ELA and math. And what they found is that there was increases in elementary reading, I believe, but not the mathematics piece. But his data came from 1999 to 2003. And so you're going to find various things. But the more recent one is the one by Dr. Miscavige and her associates out of Rutgers.
Thank you.
Do you want me just to stay?
Next.
Next would be Ray Cummings.
Ken, could you share with us if your research shows that there's any particular governance model alone that can overcome the effects of increased poverty and income equity like we experience here in St. Louis?
I'm going to go to the research study that was done by the Council of Great Cities Schools, and it was referenced on the slide where I had the list of the 5 studies. It's the one that's listed at the bottom. And what happened there is that they went in and they looked at 3 urban areas. They looked at, it was Houston, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and also Sacramento. And what they wanted to find is what was going on in those particular districts, because in those districts, student achievement increased and they were able to close achievement gaps. And they contrasted that with 3 other urban cities that had very similar demographics. What they found that was different in those cities is not so much that it was an elected board, appointed board, or a hybrid board, but those boards actually implemented those key effective governance principles that I pointed to. They also then, because they focused on student achievement, they were then focused on, again, hiring quality staff and having a curriculum that was aligned to their state standards, and they had methodologies for making sure that that curriculum was implemented in all classrooms. So I can't tell you that there's a direct causal link between one form of governance to another. What I can tell you is that there is a correlational link between school boards who actually implement those practices and increase student performance.
Thank you.
Ms. Hudson?
So my question pertains a little bit to satisfaction with the governance form that you're suggesting. Do you have any statistics or any facts which support that the parents, the teachers are more satisfied with this particular model because they feel that it is more effective, their concerns, their angsts are addressed more effectively?
That they're more responsive. And the answer to that is, and I can't tell you which one it is off the top of my head, but it is, there is one of those particular studies that's in that annotated bibliography that did do that, but they did it by really surveys of their constituents and those kinds of things. And what I'll have to do, I'm sorry, I have a colleague out there who's taking furious notes for me, that I will make sure that I point out which one that is and point that to you, and I'll just have to email, or I'll send it to all of the task force members tomorrow. So I'm sorry I can't give it to you directly, but I'll follow up.
Mr. Pruitt?
Yeah. My question is, were there any correlations between the size of an elected board and the size of the population, whether it's the number of children in the district or just the total population within that geographical area?
And here I'm going to kind of defer to the experts who are sitting behind me here for a minute, but when I did my preparation for tonight, sir, I'll be truthful that I really didn't look at size of boards. I was really looking at the models and the research behind that. So, Ms. Jacobs can answer that one. So here we go. Okay.
Good evening. So you have some states, Maryland in particular, that looks at the size of the school district to determine the number of board members. So in a school district, if you have more than 100,000 students, you have to have at least nine members. In Prince George's County, where we have 137,000 students, there's 14 board members, but that also includes a student member who is elected by his or her peers. So, and that model is increasing across the country as well, where you have a student board member who's actually making decisions that are critical to the work. So to answer your question, the number of board members, what I will tell you in terms of what the state of Maryland does, but then what I will also tell you is that if you want your school board meetings to be efficient and effective, then you would have, the larger the size of the board, the longer your board meetings, what some districts have done, because we also provide training across the country, what some districts have done is to make sure that they have designated times for their business meetings and other times that they're specifically talking about student achievement.
Is there a follow-up?
Sort of. I would love to know more about her story in Prince George and moving from elected to this 14-member hybrid and what
So-
brought that on.
Prince George is a highly political community, and I'm sure most of us who live in our own communities probably believe that. So in 2002, the elected board at that time was actually legislatively taken out of office. And in 2006, so the appointed board served from 2002 to 2006 when citizens regained their rights back to vote for the elected board. In doing so, the Prince George's County started with 4 at-large and 5 districts. And so in that model, what happened was you had, even though the 4 at-large members, I was elected at that time across the county. Prince George's is larger than 6 states in this country. At that time, I was an elected member, but I was elected at large. And in that regard, you're not necessarily, you're committed to the work, obviously, but you don't have the constituents said they couldn't touch their board member. So what happened 4 years later was that same legislature changed the model to 9 elected members. In 2013, the county executive, the then county executive and now county executive that's running for governor in Maryland, was also responsible for taking the 2002 board out when he was a delegate. So he's now county executive, and he just emphatically believes in the appointed model. He also knew, however, in that situation, that citizens were outraged that they didn't have, that if they didn't have the opportunity to vote for their elected official for school board, that wouldn't go over well. So instead of taking the board out again, the 9 members remained, and they appointed 4 additional members to the board, and that's how it became a hybrid board. What's unique about that model, though, is that the county executive also convinced the legislature to place in the law that if an elected member decided to leave for any reason, he would also get to appoint to that seat. And then those persons would have to, they could run for office, but they've now been appointed. So in Prince George's County right now, you have 9 elected members and 4 appointed members, but the majority of the board is now, were appointed either before elected or served in an appointed capacity.
Mr. Meredith.
I actually have a follow-up about that as well. So based on the slides, you said it was fully appointed and then went immediately back to fully elected.
Yes.
Were there any issues with that transition that caused you to then go to a hybrid, or was it just the elected official decided he preferred the appointed model?
The elected official preferred the appointed model in 2013. But let's just be real. Prince George's County has a $1.7 billion budget. And the county executive at the time was also, the county was going through a process. We had created, the legislature had approved National Harbor and a new, what also happened in the state was that Maryland went to lottery and gaming. And that created issues within the community and access to, you know, at the time it was called a power grab, but access to the $1.7 billion budget became more critical to the local government, quite frankly, in that situation.
So just to follow, there was no change to the school district themselves, like the student scores didn't drop, there was no
Well,
reason.
you know, and you can look this up, so I'm not making it up. From 2005 to 2012, before the 2013 takeover, the continuous improvement in student achievement was steady. When I started on the board in 2006, our 3rd and 4th grade reading scores were in the 40s and 50s. So that continuous improvement, not overnight improvement, but the continuous improvement showed significant gains, but it didn't happen by accident. So the board and superintendent team went through 2 years of intensive training together. And in that training, we focused specifically on what policies do we need to have in place that will go directly to student achievement. So the 2013 takeover, if you will, if you just, you can read any of the articles, any of the things that happened in that time. There was no student achievement reason for doing it. And then what I would say now, unfortunately, looking at the struggles in our district, right now the district is going through a controversy around graduation rates and whether or not they were accurate, and that's all happened in the last 4 years.
I'm sorry, sir, you, next, Mr. McClure.
I'll be brief with my question to either Ms. McCarter-Jacobs or Ms. Tilley. The transitional formats appointed to elected that are on this slide, there's obviously a number of different formats in the districts you cited. Is there any best practices, either that the National School Board Association has identified or that studies have identified, that are common best practices that seem to have been successful for these transitions?
So we can honestly say to you that there's not nearly enough data, which bothers us, quite frankly, because the issue is quite important. So the Center for Public Education, through the National School Boards Association, we do look at that work. But I will be honest and say that we focus, the best practices are going to be around what are the boards doing, how are they governed, how are they going through professional development, how are they focused on student achievement. And there's certain characteristics. The key work of school boards, which we have published, specifically talks about best practices for school board members in their work. The critical issue, I think, that's obvious to most people is that when you have an elected process, you believe that your vote is at the ballot box. You're deciding who represents your children and who's doing what you want them to do, so to speak. The other controversy is that there's a suggestion that because you're appointed that you're committed to whoever appointed you. And that just depends on the community. At the end of the day, what I think we believe is that the community voice must be front and center in the decision-making process.
Follow up, Mr. McClure. Follow up. Ms. Bond.
So you provided some information about what effective boards look like.
Yes.
And you also mentioned that there are statutes, obviously, that govern election of those board members.
Right.
Are there specific statutes that have been effectively put in place in other areas that have allowed for those boards to come about? Does that question make sense? So that the boards become effective relatively immediately because there's a diverse board, there's a board committed to the children. How are those boards elected?
Okay, I don't know that I fully understand your question, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
All right, and then you help me with that. In Missouri, we do have a state statute about the training. Okay. And the training is mandated by our State Board of Education, and they require that training be in certain key areas. And those key areas are ones that are absolutely critical and foundational to good governance, such as student performance. They've got to know how that is done in the state of Missouri. School finance, school law, sunshine law, nepotism, conflict of interest, really those things that could get them in lots of trouble. School, I mentioned school law, but anyway, those areas, operations, strategic planning. And so in the beginning, when someone is elected to the school board, and one of the things I want to point out too is that all of your elected school board members, even though they are not under governance control, have completed their mandated 16 hours of training. So they've received that basic training, all right? So have your SAB members, your specially appointed board members as well. So they know that, they have that foundational piece. I wish there was some magic law out there that would go boom, all right? Not that you're not it, Mr. Gaines, but I'm just going to say boom. Okay, you are the magic school board member, and you're fabulous because we're human beings, and we're just human beings. So I don't know that I truly answered your question. So I'm watching your eyes. So help me with a follow-up of what you're really trying to ask.
Okay. You did answer some of my questions.
Okay,
so that was
some,
good.
good. Okay, we got part of it, all right.
So I guess my question is, I work for a nonprofit.
Yes.
And so we have board members that
Yes.
come and serve us. But we also keep a metrics of different things that we are looking for in school board members
Yes.
to ensure we have a variety of experience, a variety of backgrounds. We want our board to reflect and mirror who our students are who are participating in our programs. Are there statutes in place, or could there be statutes in place from the city, from the state that say, you know, our board needs to look like X, Y, and Z, needs to have some experience in X, Y, and Z?
I think what you're asking is, because I know sometimes with appointed boards, like I'm going to appoint someone who is a finance expert, I'm going to appoint someone who's an attorney, I'm going to appoint somebody who's, you know, this over here. And while that sounds good in the beginning, and I think Ms. Jacobs, we were having this conversation earlier today, can probably help answer this better than I can. While that sounds good in theory, it really, going back to the democratic process, is that the school board members are selected and elected by your stakeholders, and that a lot of times some of the best boards are those that are a combination of your key professionals and the everyday people, you know, who have a vested interest in their children. I'm not answering your question exactly right, so I'm going to get my friend up here, okay, to help, because she articulates it better than I do, okay?
So if I think I understand your question, there are boards in this country where, and they're most likely appointed, where you have to have a certain, if a seat becomes vacant, you have to put a person in that seat who is an educator, a finance person. And those are typically your appointed boards. I can tell you that in 2006, when we left from an appointed board to an elected board, that first 4 years, because this became an issue, every person on that board, the 9 members, except for 2, were college educated. The suggestion was, you're going to be a highly effective board because everybody's educated. I can tell you 4 years from there, it flipped. Myself and one other colleague were the only 2 persons on the board who were educated. What I would tell you is that we had on that board committed people from the community who were parents, who were committed to their children's education, and board members who, one particular board member, she was at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning sending us stuff that she was reading because she was committed to the work. At the end of the day, I think what we're saying here is that the community voice is what's critical. So what happens, I think, when you're in elected office and someone elects you and their child is left at the bus stop and they want to know, well, I elected you, I need you to get me a bus. There's a difference in that and the board member who is trained and understands his or her role saying, I will make sure I will hold the system accountable for transportation, that there's reporting requirements, that the community has a transparent process where you can see who are you contracting with, where you can see if transportation is not going well, you have parent advisory committees. What we're saying here is that you can have that level of engagement on the board, but it doesn't take away from what the community's voice should be in that process.
Ms. Cooksey for the second time.
When looking at elected we're looking at urban school districts, do you have data on how the racial, socioeconomic background compares with an elected board compared to a appointed board? And what percentage of an elected board compared to an appointed board is made up of parents, those who live in the district?
So actually, we do have some data relative to that, and we will have to send it to you. What I can tell you, it says in SBA, as a matter of fact, every year during the delegate assembly, we look at what does school board members look like in the country. What I'll tell you is that we know that the demographic makeup of school districts in terms of the children who live in those districts is not representative across the country on the school boards. That's a fact, right? So It is, in fact, that school boards is the route that racial minorities and ethnic minorities can enter into the process, but we know we're not there yet. We know that you have communities in this country where none of the school board members look like the children that represent in that community. So what I would tell you is that the data that Janice showed you is clear that it's predominantly in urban districts. You're going to have elected boards. The key, though, is, again, is the community involved in that process?
Mr. Pruitt,
Yes.
for the second time.
So we just recently looked at some data from DESE. What we did was ask for a listing of every school district for the past 17 years that has been unaccredited or provisionally accredited. And the list came out to about 64. And then when we counted the times that DESE had to classify a district as one of those matters, it came up to about a little bit more than 200 times. So in 17 years, roughly 200 times, the State Board of Education had to declare a district as being unaccredited or provisionally accredited. And it's a group of 64 with the vast majority of them being rural. And at the same time, you say that in Missouri, the vast majority of them had elected boards. So when you hear those two stats, what does it ring out to you?
I guess what is more important is what it brings out to you.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, you stated that, I thought you stated in here, the study said that those elected boards were...
All boards in Missouri, except for the 3 specially appointed boards, are locally elected.
Right.
So all of them are.
Right, and all those 64 were too.
Correct.
With the 200 and something provisionally unaccredited. I'm just trying to understand, let me say it differently. Do you believe that the state, in looking at a district and declaring it unaccredited or provisionally accredited, should look directly also at the school board, its makeup, and its impact in that district becoming that way?
Yes. Oh, okay. I have a thought on that, but I'm going to let Virginia answer first, and then, no, you go first, and then I want to answer. Is that all right?
I do think there's, I do think you should ask that question. What I would say to you is that the very same question was asked in the school district that I was in. So if you have a state legislature, school boards are designed to be independent for a reason. Part of that reason is that they're supposed to be shielded from the political pressures, if you will. So what I would say is that what happened in districts, if you look across the country, and I would say particularly in that study, you would probably need to also ask what was happening at the school board level. How stable was the school board? So there's questions constantly you'll hear across the country. Oh, the average stay of a superintendent is 2.5 to 3 years. What's the average stay of school board members? Elections do come and go, but when you have stability at both levels, you're going to see this work is hard work. So when you have the level of stability at both levels, that's when you're going to see the continuous improvement. So I think it's a fair question for you to ask. If it's elected members and the state is consistently taking over or whatever they're doing, what does that mean? Well, I would suggest to you that that's probably, it's probably an area that you should look at what's the stability of those local boards as well. And so if you have the same transitions that you have for superintendents, you have at local school boards.
And the reason I ask is the parents are being held accountable. Mm-hmm. The teachers are they're being held accountable, they're saying they were responsible. The administration is, the principals and everybody has been saying that they're responsible for the reason that district is that way. but I just haven't seen anything where anybody assessed the board and its governance and how it impacted the district getting that way. That's,
Yeah, if you have boards that have no vision and aren't following their mission and are not going through training, or not letting the superintendent do his or her job, are asking superintendents to hire their relatives, or when you have those kinds of things going on in districts, you're not going to have student success.
Yeah. And, okay, I can't really follow that, but here's what I am reading into your question, and I want to make sure that I'm not taking it the wrong way. But first of all, I have questions about the data that you're using, that we have that high number of entire districts that have been from there, that they are said to be provisional or unaccredited. I know that every year we come out with our APR, of 70% year above or below, but accreditation is determined on 3 years worth of data. And so, but one of the things that I will share with you is that, and we have had these conversations with DESE, is that when there is support for these districts, they get what's called a regional school improvement team. We have shared that we believe that part of that team should also be support and assistance and training and help for the board as well. And so we agree that it is those 3 levels of leadership of the governance, administrative, and at the teacher level.
I can share the report with you from this.
I would love, yeah, and yeah. But we
ask, we like to ask.
Yeah, no, okay, all right. We'll just share stuff back and forth.
Ms. Hudson.
So I hear you talking about representation and the importance of representation, and that sometimes the makeup of the board is not representative of the community. And so I'm interested in knowing what successful strategies boards have implemented to ensure that those parents who are not represented on the elected board, their voices are heard, and that their children's needs are addressed in addition to the children's parents who are actually on the board.
Yeah, that's a really important question, because we know that PTAs really aren't designed that way necessarily in communities. So school boards that develop parent advisory groups tend to see success in that. And parent advisory groups are those that are going to have parents from all walks of life, and they are specifically designed. You have a parent on the parent advisory group that has a child or children with special needs. You will make sure that you have a parent on that advisory group who have children who are excelling with TAG programs. The idea is to have a specific policy, and there are policies across the country, and we could send you one from several from the region, where the superintendent is required to meet with the parent advisory group. And the parent advisory group is part of the board team. So we created what was called a Disabilities Advisory Group, where it was a group of parents and educators whose sole purpose was to be an ad hoc board committee to the board about those kinds of issues. So the way you make sure you have voice is you create the policies that demand and mandate that parents will be part of a group that's not considered just within the PTA process. And in other ways, make sure you have the student advisory group, make sure the student voice is heard, and then have reporting requirements. So oftentimes boards will develop policies, but they don't include the reporting requirements. So the reporting requires that the superintendent periodically throughout the school district, throughout the school year, will provide an update on where you are. And so boards have to trust but verify. So it's not just giving you a report, it is a report with data, and school boards that are data-driven are often more successful, except that you can't get so data-driven that you forget the human voice.
Can I ask just one very quick follow-up question? Of those communities where there's a disparity between the representation, how often, do you have statistics or facts that show how often those pacts are put into place or those policies are put into place?
Sure. So we have policies we can pull from various communities and make sure you get those. So for example, the Parent Advisory Council that I was talking about, depending on the size of your district, you want to make sure. Now, one way that one district did it was they had, for board members would choose 2 constituents from each district, and that would form their committee, but they would vote on their own who was going to be chair and vice chair. They also did the same thing with the business community, so that you would have the business community voice. At the end of the day, the board just has the responsibility to make sure that you're getting all the information that you can get from various stakeholders.
Is there anyone else wanting to ask the second question or first? Not seeing any hands, we now go to the audience for questions. The audience, you will have 3 minutes to ask a question and/or comment. At the end of the answer to your question and/or comment, you will then have the right to ask a follow-up. The first person, based on sign-in, is Mr. Robert Miller.
I didn't know you had to sign in for a question.
Yes, you do. It is still not too late to sign in. Mr. Miller, we will take sign-ins all day. We'll be here until this is, the questions are answered.
Yeah,
You sign in outside.
I think you asked for my name, Robert Miller.
Yes.
That's me, all right. Yeah, my question is, when I look at these schools that aren't accredited, I see Kansas City, Kansas City, the St. Louis City, which, thank goodness now, is accredited, thanks to someone's good work. But then unaccredited, I see Normandy, Ferguson, Florissant, just on the line, Riverview Gardens. It seems to me these are all elected boards. When they become unaccredited, I don't see much correlation between whether the board is elected by the democratic process or if it's a selected committee. Like St. Louis, they have 3 selected by the alderman, president, the governor selects one, and the 3rd one is by the mayor, the mayor, thank you. And Normandy has 7 members on their selected board by DESI or through the federal state government. I don't know and I don't care, but it's very volatile too. It changes, and it's changed a number of times over the last 3 or 4 years that it was selected. So here again, I don't see any correlation between the board. To me, the board, whether it's selected, like the city, or Normandy, or any other unaccredited where it's been gone selected, and an elected board. To me, the elected board has the responsibility, just like the appointed board, to select a good superintendent. And they're going to follow the superintendent. And I see many, many, many elected boards by the democratic process where they don't follow the superintendent. So the superintendent throws up his arms and gets out. Well, that hasn't happened in the city of St. Louis. Unaccredited 10 years ago, you don't change these things. And now St. Louis City is not accredited because of the coming and going of many, many, many different elected board members. I think they're where they are today because of a good superintendent who brought in specialized schools. Congratulations to him for Malincrot School, which is a national blue ribbon school. Thank goodness for the special schools that they've started for kids that can't go to college and don't have the ability.
5 seconds.
How much?
5 seconds.
Oh, you should give me all right, my question is, look at what happened in Lindbergh. The NEA elected 3 board members. The NEA, the teachers union. I'm sorry, but I don't think a teachers union should be electing school board members so that the teachers can get more money.
Your time has expired. I'm going to name the next 3 to 4 people as I've been directed to do, so you will know who to go who should be going to the respective microphones. You may still sign up for questions right outside. Next person to come next will be Byron Clemson, Finis Coleman, and Robert Vroman, in that order. There are 2 microphones on each side. I mean, 1 microphone in each aisle. Byron Clemson. Clemens, I'm sorry.
My 3 minutes can start now. Byron Clemens, it's B-Y-R-O-N-C-L-E-M-E-N-S. I am a city resident, associated with the American Federation of Teachers, but I'm a taxpayer and a citizen. I have some questions about this task force, but I'll bring those up at the last meeting, which I hope will be a public meeting when you take a vote about your recommendation to the SAB to move forward. I hope that last meeting will be a public meeting. Just want to say that now. I read in the paper this weekend that the governor has made some moves on the Missouri State Board of Education again, politicizing the process up there. And so I look at that and think of Mr. Singfeld and how he throws his money around, and what the legislature looks like right now. I really strongly believe we should move in the direction of an elected school board as soon as possible and avoid all of that. I started at Frable in 1956 with my association with the St. Louis Public Schools, and I haven't given up yet. I look back, I've gone through some interesting times with Mr. Shamel driving around a parking lot. For a while, we had the White Citizens Council that was in charge of the school board. Anybody remember that? They didn't last long, but they were elected. I believe in elected school boards. I believe there shouldn't be no taxation without representation. And we heard from the NSBA. I've looked at some of the same data that you talked about before this meeting, and I want people to think about this. You saw the numbers yourself, but 90% of school boards are elected. That's a fact. And I'd like you all to think about what separates the city of St. Louis from the 90% of other school districts. Is that it's a minority district. It's not right to single out urban school districts and have these mayoral takeovers and appointed boards, and sometimes they might work, but it's time for us. We've had this experiment. We've moved somewhat forward recently. We have a great superintendent, but it is time to return to elected school board.
30 seconds.
So I would like the presenters to address what I'm saying. What is it about our demographics that singles us out and makes us a great candidate for an appointed board? Can you address that, please? Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. What I would say to that is that the inequities that exist in our society are no different in the education systems in our society. And what do I mean by that? I heard earlier, I don't know all the details relative to how budget happens in the state of Missouri for education, but what I will say to you is that it is rare for states in this country to have a mandate to fund public education based on the needs of students. And so what tends to happen is that the inequities that exist, and particularly in areas of poverty, if school boards are not equipped to understand and know what it takes to vote on a budget that is driven by student need, they can't be effective. One of the ways that elected boards, and quite frankly appointed boards could do, if they're committed to that work, is that you trust but verify. So what's different? It is a fact that in urban districts and urban-like districts, sometimes the funding is not directed towards the needs of the student. You have X number of students, you get a certain number of teachers. That's not about the children. That's about a formula. And so when I hear that a district like St. Louis has lost $12 million, the question then becomes, and we had this experience, use your citizens as your leverage. So the constituents in St. Louis, the residents of St. Louis, should be at the State House beating down the door saying, we want the money for our children. And sometimes in the democratic process, you need that to be able to get it done.
Mr. Finis Coleman.
I would like the other two presenters to address the same question, please.
Is there a need?
Why are urban districts that have the demographics we do singled out for the experiment of appointed boards?
Is there a need or do you think she did?
I think she dealt with it. We were happy to if she wants to. We can.
You don't have to respond.
No, it's fine. We will. Okay.
Well, I think Regina did a nice job in answering the question. And quite frankly, I'd just like to put a point of emphasis on what she said. This is a matter of statute that's decided in Jefferson City. And if these issues need to be addressed, they're defined and they're decided for us at the state capitol. So communicating with our legislators what you want as a community needs to be done, not just on a night like tonight. I mean, this is important to have this conversation, but it needs to be done year-round. And to share what is the values of this city and what we want for our children. Define those, articulate those clearly, and communicate them. So I think Regina said it better than I can, but I would just like to put a point of emphasis. That's where the decisions are made in terms of the issues that you brought up.
I think it's unfortunate that.
I'm sorry, sir, Whip, you cannot.
I do have a follow-up question when.
No.
It is.
No, you've already had that.
I had a question, I haven't had a follow-up.
You have already asked that your
I thought the rule
question
said
be
I had a
answered
follow-up.
by others. Now, you've had two answers to your question. One person already. We do have others here who want to ask questions. Next is Finis Coleman, followed by Robert Vroman and Danny Jones. Finis Coleman.
Hi, I'm Robert Vroman. I'm on the Missouri Republican Party Central Committee. I represent the 4th Senate District. I'm also on the City Republican Party, representing the 22nd Ward. We had a meeting on the night of November 1st. We passed a very short resolution. I'm going to read that. Be it resolved that the Republican Central Committee of the City of St. Louis opposes any long-term form of governance of the St. Louis Public School District other than a fully elected Board of Education. Thank you.
Donna Jones, Dorothy Rhodes Collins, and Susan Jones.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donna Jones. I've been on the board for 11 years. It'll be 12 years. I've only gotten one term in 1 year. But you'll remember back in 2007, we took over the mayor's office because it was so important to us that we had local control and that our children's voices were heard. I was a volunteer in St. Louis Public School for years. I had 7 children that went through St. Louis Public School, and I was hurt. I remembered I lived down the street from Northwest High School, and must say it still looks like a prison, just like it did when I was 17 years old living on Thekla. And it was so painful. That was one of the motivating factors that made me want to run for the board. Politics has destroyed St. Louis Public Schools, and that's a serious problem right now. I sat inside of those boardrooms, so you can't say I read it somewhere. I'm telling you what the facts are. This is about millions of dollars. This is about big business wanting to take over that money. Millions of dollars disappeared from all those various contractors. Of course, we had some wonderful contractors that did their job, but many of them weren't doing anything but stealing from St. Louis Public Schools. And it's really time for the public to stand up for our children. We have blood on the street. We have thousands of children who are homeless in St. Louis that have no one to speak up for them, and I'm frankly just tired. I'm a resident of the 27th Ward, and we have the worst crime rate, and we have the worst schools over there. We have unequal education, and I'm sorry people are saying Donna Jones is so emotional. When do you get tired? Every night somebody's getting shot and somebody's getting killed. Time enough. We have teachers that are doing a great job with what they can, but they are not receiving the resources that they need. I'm telling you, big business needs to get their hands out of St. Louis Public Schools money and some of these politicians, because we have just had enough. Enough is enough. So many times I've walked down the street, I've walked up in the schools, and people are saying, well, the board members should stay out of the schools and let the superintendent run. That's fine, but still, we want to hear what the parents have to say. We want to hear what the community has to say because they spend their tax dollars. I'm looking at the schools and I'm wondering, where's my tax dollars? Because our schools should look fabulous. We have millions of dollars for a football stadium, millions of dollars for a soccer stadium, everything else but for our schools. When our children walk in the schools, they should look like a palace. They should be able to eat off the floors if they need to. They should have everything that they desire. They should have a technical school on North and in South St. Louis. This is wrong, and I'm looking for change, and I'm hoping that everyone here will ask everybody in their neighborhood to come out and support the schools like they should. Thank you.
Dorothy Rhodes Collins, followed by Susan Jones and Rebecca Rogers.
My name is Dorothy Rhodey Collins. I have been a St. Louis City resident since 2006. When I moved to the city, I moved here because I had a contract with the St. Louis Public Schools. So I taught at Northwest Academy. I taught chemistry and biology and math and just about everything else in the science department from 2006 to 2012, which was almost entirely under SAB leadership. I am a SLPS parent. My son is in kindergarten at Wilkinson. So I have seen the district from a lot of perspectives. But what I think is really important is that our city is hurting right now, and it's hurting because people's voices are not being heard. What we need in this city is more democracy and not less. And I think it's very important that we consider how our schools interact with the community. So Donna was very passionate about everything that she was saying, and I support all of her words, because that is so true. We cannot have a great city without great schools. And our teachers are not being provided the things that they need. The parents don't feel like they have a voice. They don't have a way to reach out. You can go to an appointed board meeting and you still are not hearing a dialogue around where your tax dollars are being spent, where the policies are coming from. None of that is happening. That will happen at an elected board because the people will demand it. Thank you.
Susan Jones.
Good evening. I stand before you tonight as an SLPS alum, parent of an SLPS student, taxpayer, business owner, city resident, and president of the elected Board of Education. I stand before you tonight to advocate for the students that have struggled getting the resources that they need, for the students at work right now making ends meet for their families, those at home watching their siblings, the disenfranchised, for the teachers that have gone years without a decent pay increase, basic resources needed to run a classroom effectively, and for the, on average, 238 teacher population that leaves SLPS every year. For the families and taxpayers that have continuously ignored, moved to charters out of the St. Louis area or weren't able to make it out tonight. For every voter that went to the ballot box voting for school board members over the last 10 years, hoping that one day their voices would be heard. For the 26,439 voters that casted a vote for me to return back for a second term to advocate and stand up for the interests and needs for the St. Louis area. For the future of SLPS. I stand before you as someone who truly cares about the well-being and future of the students of St. Louis Public Schools. You see, the elected board is a critical link to the successful public schools, and leadership in SLPS plays an intricate part in the stability, crime rates, housing, jobs, future growth, or lack thereof within this community. Elected boards are better because we are strongly connected and represent the community because we are inclusive. Trained by the Missouri School Boards Association because we are certified. Transparent and accountable to the community because we are elected by the people and can be removed by the people because democracy. And for the last 10 years, SLPS has dealt under an education strategy whose substantial measures take control over education out of the hands of the community and confers it to affluent developers, out-of-state charter school boosters, and into a system that favors little to no transparency in public education. The issues SLPS faces would never happen in Ladue, Clayton, or any other affluent school district. Are residents really unworthy of receiving the same control as other school districts? Why? A task force mixed with non-city residents, and no representation from African-American parents whose children make up the majority of this district. Why? Questions that need answers. So while the SAB has served its time, our local civil rights have been abused, and local tax dollars have been mismanaged because state takeover. The state of Missouri can't meet its constitutional responsibility to provide each locality with the resources needed to ensure students have an equitable and valuable opportunity to learn, and at the same time claim the need to violate democratic rights of citizens because state takeover. The only option charged by the state board right now is to return governance back to a fully elected board. Facts. And any structure outside of an elected board would require legislative action and could go on to add amendments that will hurt the families of SLPS. Facts. Continued community involvement has always been needed, hence an elected board, and not just when the appointed board is looking to pass something. Facts. So spending $80,000 on the recommendation when the Danforth Committee has already researched this, and while rushing this process, shows how much you think of this community. Facts. The time is now for a governance transition to process to happen, and more importantly, to the taxpayers in the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
Ms. Rebecca Rogers, followed by Darrell Smith and Andrea Brannigan.
Good evening. I want to thank the MSBA presenters. That presentation was very informative, I thought. My name is Rebecca Rogers. I'm a former elected school board member. I served from 2009 to 2012. I'm also a university professor in literacy education. I'm really proud to have been a part of the collective effort to keep alive in the public imagination the importance of an elected school board. I think that you're hearing that that belief is strong tonight in the public comments that you're hearing. I'd like to offer just two of the reasons, and there's more, of why I'm in support of a transition to an elected school board. First, a state-run school system in the long term diminishes the capacity of a community to govern itself by removing leadership and decision-making from the community. This is particularly problematic because the appointed boards that exist in the state of Missouri exist in minoritized communities. Critical race scholars refer to this as accumulation by dispossession. So again, that's accumulation by dispossession. And it's the profit-making that intersects with racism and white supremacy. And it's this disenfranchisement of the African American community, which weakens community expertise, infrastructure, and results in the accumulation of white privilege and supremacy. Second, research, and the West Virginia study really piqued my interest as well. Other states that have transitioned from an appointed board to an elected board, a key in that successful movement was the continued existence of an elected school board. So I think that St. Louis Public Schools is well poised to return to a democratically elected school board because our elected school board has continued to remain active in its auditing and reporting powers, and I'm just really proud of their continued efforts to do so. Last, I have a question, and that has to do with state statute, and I thought, Addie Bond, you were getting at this, but maybe not, and that is the question of what I understand the current Missouri state statute is that it's written so that the power can return automatically to an elected school board. So would that state statute need to be rewritten in order to have any other form of school board?
I think your question, let me just repeat it and make sure I understood it, that if there was to be a return or power given to another form of governance other than an elected board, would a statute have to be drafted? Is that your question? Okay. Legislation have to be implemented. I'm certainly not acting as counsel on behalf of the committee, But that is my understanding, that is my interpretation of the statute. There isn't, the way the statute was drafted for the Metropolitan District, which is St. Louis, you have a unique statute, and to give governance to another form long-term, there would need to be legislation. But again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the committee, but that is our interpretation.
That is our understanding as well. Darrell Smith, Andrea Brannigan, and Nick Metropolis.
My name is Darrell Smith. I'm a concerned citizen. And, you know, I've been troubled about this voting. Voting is so important to me. And people are voting, and they got a board they're not being, the people have spoken. They want this elected board to represent them, their kids, their family, and it's a connection with them. They're stakeholders. But this governor's thing, the intentions might have been good at first, but it's time for them they did their job, it's time to move over and let the school boards take over and do what they got to do. You know, that's what it's about, you know. And I've just been concerned about that. You know, I want them the kids are the most important thing that we have in the city, and we got to be concerned about them. We got to, you know, the best gift you can give, a child is a good example. When the kids are watching us, we got to do a good job for them because they need us, and we got to educate them. We got to have a way for the community to hold these people accountable, and that's the best way with the school board. Thank you so much.
Andrea Brannigan.
Hello. First, I didn't know that I was coming to speak, but since my name is on the list, I'm a graduate of Vashon High School, and I just want to know, I heard there was a meeting here, so I came. I just want to know, what can I do as an alumni graduate to help the committee? That's my question. What can I do to help? You don't want my help?
Well, I think your being here would certainly help. If there are other things you'd like to do on behalf of the schools, you can see someone outside who is taking names and just explain to them that you'd like to be of help to the task force.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Nick Metropolis, Richard Bouthard, and Jay Ozier.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Nick Metropolis. I teach American history, American government at Collegiate School of Medicine and Bioscience. And I just want to talk to you from that standpoint of history and politics. Every day I go to school and I talk to the children about how important civic engagement is and being a part of your community. And I think the first point that was made was the importance of modeling democracy. And the kids every day have a lot of questions about the institutions of democracy in our country. Whether it's elections of presidents through the Electoral College, or it's the gerrymandering that's taking over the state of Missouri, which does not represent the population. My question to you is to think about critically is, why is the state involved? Why is the state so interested in the SLPS and St. Louis Public Schools when there are districts in this state where they use corporal punishment and they physically put their hands on children, but there's no hybrid board discussion. There's districts in the state where they have 4 days of school and there is no discussion, interference on the local control. And I'm just curious, from your point of view, what do you think is the difference between St. Louis City and this school district versus maybe a rural or other struggling district? Thank you.
I don't think that is a question that is going to be well answered by the panel that has been assembled here in terms of our presenters. It's a good question. We will attempt, we will labor to answer that question because of all of your questions are being taken by court stenographer, and we will attempt to get back with you. That's the reason for wanting your name and your email address. We will attempt to answer that in that manner. Richard Bouthold.
Thank you. I am not currently a school parent. I'm not a school teacher. I'm not a school vendor. I am absolutely a beneficiary of good public school governance or victim of bad school governance. I come at this a little different than some people. I am fixated on local politics. I don't like to use militaristic terms like a foot soldier, and I just as soon not think of myself as a streetwalker. So I will say I am a door knocker for democracy in St. Louis. And here are my concerns. They've been stated before. They've been alluded to by Ms. Cooksey, Mr. Pruitt. Number one is the disenfranchisement of black people. The paternalistic approach to school governance is counter to our very founding. The racism in these moves is unmistakable. Number two, the valuing of efficiency and short-term test scores over discussion and long-term learning as the measure of what is a successful school disturbs me. And finally, budgets. Budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars. Budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars that will be under the control of Donald Trump, Betsy DeVos, and Eric Greitens, who has shown his willingness to politicize anything for his personal gain, not for the state's gain. I'm very worried about that, so I'm very worried about a governor like Greitens having a voice on our school board. And as a previous questioner touched on, and one of our very first speakers made this beautiful point, what have our children learned in the last 10 years? They have learned they have no voice in St. Louis public schools. Finally, with a few seconds to spare, my one question is this: how dare you consider stealing our votes from us?
30 seconds. Jay Ozier, Jessica Payne, and Justin Eidelberg. Jay Ozier.
Yes. I'm a taxpayer first. One of the things that they always tell you is two things that you're going to do for a working person. You're going to pay taxes, and then you're going to die. And I'm a taxpayer and citizen in the St. Louis, but I wanted to say very clearly it was by the other people that have spoke, everyone that I've heard, about the importance of democracy and us having the right to vote and elect our own leadership is very important if we're going to call this a democracy. Some of the information that was pointed out was that in this round of the budget, St. Louis Public Schools was shortchanged $12 million. It is no way to believe that if we go to the state governor's office or state legislature to ask them to change anything in the law to do anything, that they're going to not go in and use that as a crack to do more harm than they could ever attempt to do good. It's not in them. You can't get it out of them. You can talk to them. You got 163 state representatives, 34 state senators, and it's not going to work with them. We can't ask them for nothing. The best thing for us to do is to let the law as it is set, the statutes as they stand, take that course, get us an elected board. Because if these guys have any say, just a city, any say in what to be done, it's going to be bad news. They just took a pay increase.
30 seconds.
Okay. They just took a pay increase from people that work in the city. They took it from them. Took it. That's stealing.
Jessica Payne.
Hello, my name is Jessica Payne. I'm a community organizer, a social worker, and a North City resident. I have more of a statement than a question. In St. Louis, I don't really like what I see with appointed boards. There's two boards in particular, the LCRA board and the TIF Commission. Since 2010, they have diverted at least 700 million tax dollars away from public schools. And that is an appointed board not representing the people that they're supposed to be serving. In my neighborhood in North City, Old North, in 2013, they did a study with all the school-age children to see which schools they went to. Our closest school is Ames. We also have Confluence Academy in Old North. But the study found in a neighborhood of less than 2,000 people, the students went to more than 42 different schools. We need people on our board that understand the community where people actually live. We need people who understand these issues because they live them. And I don't believe an appointed board will get to that. So I'm here saying that the only way that I think we're actually going to get representation that represents our community is through an elected process. Thank you.
Rasheen Aldridge and Michael Butler.
Hello, all you lovely people. I'm glad y'all all at this table today. First thing I'd like to point out is to I think it was the nice young lady up there with the cream jacket on. You presented some information from the National School Board Association, and one of the points talked about advocating for equity and excellence in schools. And I would like for you all to make a note and a possible adoption of the signature priorities from the Ferguson Commission report that offers opportunity to thrive and youth at center. Now, let's get to some fun stuff about the next young lady who came. I believe you come from the state of Missouri. And the young lady sitting next to her, you all talked about an example in Prince George County. But you all from educationweek.com, from NBC News Forum in DC, and from the Prince George County Advocates for Better Schools, the Prince George thing is really not working. The same things that they're saying they're trying not to do, have politics, it's all playing a dirty hand. They talk about, the advocates for Prince George's County has did a study and reported on the things that have been going on wrong in the last decade. So I wish for Prince George County not to be an example for us to follow, because it's one thing that separates St. Louis City Schools from Prince George County, and that is money. They are a minority-owned, not minority-run, but their population is minorities, us, African Americans. They're all in the upper tax brackets. They're in Forbes magazines, things of that nature. And even with their nicely appointed board, they still have the same issues we got going on now. And I just found this information out when the nice young lady got up there to talk about that data that she was using for an example. And last but not least, no disrespect to you all on this board, with the exception of Ms. Cooksey and Reverend Jones, I can't knock on none of y'all door. I don't have a relationship with you all, so how you all gonna represent me or any of these other people? None of you all look like disenfranchised people up there. You know, you have a parent up there, I don't know this lady's tax bracket or nothing, but you don't look like you live behind the Delmore Divide or on the state streets of the South Side. So all this looks real nice and dandy, and you know, to me, it's
30 seconds.
I appreciate that. This looks very offensive because, as President Jones said, she had so many residents come out to voice their opinion on who we want, not who elected officials and state-appointed people want, but who we want. When do the people get what they want? We do projects here in St. Louis. When you all want them to get done, it says on a regional level. When will you all do something for the people that's within the region? Because everything that gets done here is based off us.
Michael Butler.
I think Rasheen is first. Rasheen was ahead of me. Go ahead.
I think I was first. You said Michael second. Go ahead. But I'll go anyway. Hi, my name is Rasheen Aldridge. I am a city resident all my life. I'm the 5th Ward Committee man, served on the Ferguson Commission. I'm a young man in the city of St. Louis trying to make change for my community. 3 things. I grew up in the city of St. Louis, but I went to a county school. I went to Parkway. I would travel out to Parkway, and I would feel free. I would see the school, and it would be lovely. Like Ms. Donna said, that school out in Parkway was a palace. I could literally eat off that floor, but when I came back home in the summertime to Jefferson Elementary and would go there for summer school, the schools was totally different. The resources that was provided was totally different. And I'm 23. That was back when I was 6 and 8, so the schools was accredited. So to act like that is the school board's fault, or to act like it is the elected individuals that were elected's fault is truly wrong. It is the continuation of Missouri not wanting to give a damn about black lives, not wanting to put resources into black communities, and clearly being a student of Parkway is possible, but I was also one of those students that took dollars out of my community that eventually hurted the school districts in my community. Second thing, show me what a democracy looks like. This is what a democracy looks like. 100,000 people went out this last April and casted their votes for, can every person that ran for office this last election, school board member, please stand up. We casted our votes for these individuals. These individuals were the ones that was out on the pavement. These individuals was the ones knocking on our doors, asking us, what is your concerns about the school? Why do you like SLPS? These individuals are the ones at the community meetings. These individuals that ran for office are the ones that are trying to engage the young people, trying to engage the parents, trying to engage the community so we can make our school district the democratic school district that we want to live in. Last thing, and you guys can sit down. But thank you for your tireless service. Last thing, it is beyond disrespectful for you all, and I'm not going to say all of you because it is beyond disrespectful for the 3 members of the SAB, Mr. Roberts, I don't know your name, I believe it's, or Mr. Gaines, I'm sorry, Mr. Rick Sullivan, and there's another young lady. I know you guys was appointed and your charge is to find different methods, but you showed up at the last school board meeting at Patrick Henry, and you were so disrespectful to the community. You were so disrespectful to the people. You would not even sit with the school board, but you came to them and told them this is what they're going to have to do, and then expected them to be here. And then expect everyone to either pick a elected board, a hybrid board, or a satellite board. A good option would be is actually putting one of the young people from the school districts on the board. But I'm gonna make this very clear. I know my time is up. But I recommend, as a young person, as a resident of this community, if we do not put it back to an elected board, people are going to shut down the city because their voices are not being heard.
Michael Butler.
So I'm Michael Butler, state representative for the 79th District, where we are today. I'm also the House Democratic Caucus chair, and I'm a former St. Louis Public School educator, and up until this last year where I became the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, I always sat on the Education Committee in the Missouri House. So I said it to say this, and it's a fact that we all know that the law is clear. State law is clear on this. The elected school board should be in governance. The law is perfectly clear that after a school board is no longer unaccredited, that the state-appointed board is supposed to transition into a elected school board. Now, the law is incomplete because we've been working on the auspice that there is no timetable to that. But since that time, even we became provisional, we've now become fully accredited. And the law is perfectly clear on fully accredited school districts, and they are to be governed by elected school boards. By elected school boards. So the truth is, what we're asking to do today, we can already have done. The state-appointed board can clearly advocate in Jefferson City for an elected school board. The state-appointed board can clearly listen to everything the current elected school board wants, and then declare that be done in policy in the school board. The state-appointed board could clearly, which appoint this task force, can clearly appoint elected school board members, members of task forces, or member of any board that can govern the school district. But I think the statement from our speaker from the Missouri School Board Association was said it the best, and something I've been saying in Jefferson City for years. At the end of the day, all government structures work and don't work. It really doesn't matter what the government structure is. What matters is that we have a good superintendent. And this is another argument for the elected school board. The elected school board has already suggested they would keep our phenomenal superintendent, Dr. Adams, on board. The number one reason for a school board is to pick a superintendent. So while I'm very happy that our state-appointed board has put us back in the black, they have picked a phenomenal superintendent, and they have helped us regain our accreditation. But after 10 years of great work, it is time. We've been waiting. And someone asked you should be talking to your legislators. I've heard from many of you over the years.
30 seconds.
So my question is clear, because the people are clear on this too. After this task force is completed, we are sure that the people want to elect the school board, will the SAB and this task force come to Jefferson City and declare jointly that we need an elected school board to our state legislature, to our governor? That's my question to the task force, hopefully to the members of the SAB that are here.
That is not something for you to answer, I know. That belies the process that we're here to address this evening.
Can I have a follow-up? Can I have a follow-up? Not if, but when the people of this, the citizens of this school district make it clear by via the survey or the town halls or by other means that they clearly want to elect the school board, will this task force and the SAB,
Mr. Butler,
join myself in asking for an elected school board?
Mr. Butler, so that it is clear for you and all assembled here, we do not ask or we do not tell the state how they, no, I'm not going to get involved in back and forth here. I'm trying to explain what our role is. Our role, we have asked these people sitting before this group to gather information, to make a recommendation to us. We will follow what 781, which is a law that was promulgated in Jefferson City that developed the entire process for this. We will make a recommendation. That recommendation will be to DESE. DESE is the one who has a responsibility to basically work with the recommendation we make or any position that they should take. Now, what we are here to do, or to do, is get the bedrock information to make that recommendation. Although many of you who are gathered here have spoken, we have also sent out 10,500 surveys to people throughout this community, asking them for their opinions as well in terms of whether or not this should be turned back to an elected school board, an appointed school board, and or a hybrid school board. Now, let me clear one other thing, because I don't think it's been...
Thank you, Mr. I'm going to take my seat and just say that the last thing we
No,
want
no,
is to
no,
go to
sir,
Jefferson City
sir,
without
sir.
a unified voice from our
please.
task force members, from our SAB, and from our elected school board.
I would not
Thank you.
want to try and tell you what to do as a state rep, but I am going to ask that you also comport yourself in the same manner that we've asked others to.
I'm going to take my seat, yes.
Thank you.
I'm saying I'm going to take my seat.
Mr. Lou Moy.
Good evening. My name is Lou Moy, and I came tonight as one who, for over 50 years, have fought for representation at the table of governance in the city of St. Louis, at all levels of governments, as a citizen and as a minority citizen, have fought for representation, for our voices to be heard at all levels of government, whether it be alderman, whether it was fighting for a U.S. congressman to have a voice in Congress, whether it was fighting to have a voice at the Board of Aldermen, whether it was fighting to have a voice as a state representative or a state senator for over 50 years. We've fought for that. And so I came tonight basically to reaffirm our support for an elected school board. We have fought to have an elected board for the last 10 years. And as a longtime member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, I want to say for the record that we are reaffirming our support for an elected school board for the last 10 years. Also, I would like to say that we've had differences with elected officials, whether they be aldermen, state representatives, or mayors, but we've never came and debated whether we should give up our right to elect them. We've never had a debate. We never had a debate about giving up the right to elect the mayor or to allow the governor to appoint the mayors in this state. So I don't think we should be even having a debate about giving up the right to elect folks to represent our students, to represent our kids. I mean, the best way I believe that parents, educators, and the community can be involved and have a say-so about our school system is through the electoral process. And as a minority, I don't think we should even be debating, a minority citizen, we should be even debating whether we should be electing folks or agreeing.
30 seconds.
Or agreeing for someone to appoint who represent us when it comes to our school. Thank you.
Evelyn Hine.
Good evening. I'm a retired teacher from St. Louis Public Schools. I'm also an entrepreneur that's been in the city for many, many years, since I was a kid. One of my biggest concerns, and I think most of the people in here have really brought it out, is that who are the stakeholders in here? Because see, these boards that you all are coming up with, they're not stakeholders in here. We need people from our community to be stakeholders in what's going on with our children. I had 4 children out in the county on the DSEG program. I brought them back into the city when I started teaching because I wanted them to be in here where I had a stake in the city. And my kids did graduate from the city. The only reason why this district has gone the way it has is politics. You need to take it up out of our schools. These kids are hurting. The teachers, you're killing them. They walking out every day, somebody's dying. And it's because they don't get any support. They need support. When I retired last year, when I was run out, When I retired last year, I didn't have a book to teach with. I begged for books. I didn't have pencils for children. See, all this has to do with what the children get from a teacher. So if the teacher don't have the food to feed the child with, they're not gonna learn. So we need to start back there because, see, before 2000, when I had children in the district, these teachers had things to work with. So now we need to get back to the basics. And you say this is democracy? Wow. How are you gonna take my right to vote? How do you do that? And I don't care if it's Desi and anybody else. I want to find out how do we go over their head. Because see, you shouldn't be able to do that. You shouldn't have the right to take my right away to vote for who I want up in that board. Because see, the average one don't have anything to do with, turn my mic back on. Average one don't have nothing to do with what's going on with these kids, and the average one don't care. You go get everybody out of the district. How about hiring some teachers that live in the district? How about that? Because see, then they have a stake.
30 seconds.
I see the clock. They got a stake in this because their children go there. See, I'm used to all of that rudeness and stuff because as teachers, they dummied us down and made us stop teaching. You got the teachers out of the classroom because they got too much of this silly stuff to deal with. Our children need to come first. So all this about what everybody else is doing around, how about let's use a board that we elected?
Ms. Glenda Thornton.
Good evening, all. My name is Glenda Thornton. Sorry, I'm short. But Mr. Gaines, you told me you was leaving. Are you or are you not? Second, do we have a parent advisory board meeting at any time or when it is? Because I surely would love to attend.
Hi, I would like to answer your question. So I was chosen to sit on this committee because I'm the chairman-elect of the Parent Action Council, which is our district-wide PTO. It's an opportunity for parents to come together from across all the schools. We ask each school to send 2 representatives so that we have parent representation from across the district. We meet monthly. Typically, it is the last Tuesday of the month, and I can get you the dates. We would welcome you to come. Any parent that is in the district, anyone acting in local parentis, we would really appreciate your attendance. We want to know what's going on in your schools. Thank you.
Ms. Jala Gillespie. Ms. Jala Gillespie. Jana.
Hello, my name is Jayla Gillespie.
Jayla.
I'm an 8th grade student at McKinley, and I was wondering, do you all plan on having any students on the board? Because our voices aren't heard at all. I am Jonathan Gillespie, 3rd grade student from Mason School. If not, do you have any chances of us having our voices heard or our input? Oh, how can I participate as a student in my future in the task force?
Mr. Bill Haas. Now, this is my mistake. Mr. Haas was due to speak earlier. Mr. Haas.
They're asking if we're going to answer the kids' questions.
I think they're waiting for an answer to the previous question.
We do, if the question is whether or not we will allow a person to sit on the board who was, quote, and while we're here not appointed, we could not do that. If he would like to come to school board meetings, we'd be more than happy to have him come to school board meetings, as we would anyone else who is here. Bill Haas.
Good evening, Mr. Gaines, Mr. Sullivan, down at a Clinkscale Task Force, my fellow elected board members, members of the community. My name is Bill Haas. I've been on the elected board now for 15 years, from 97 to 2005, and again from 2010 to the present, the second longest serving school board member since Stan Schlafly a generation ago. I've never been a big fan of the Missouri School Board Association, and I was going to be disappointed to say that I think they lived down to my expectations because I thought they were going to make the case for an elected board. And then the light came on when I heard them say they were told to be neutral. Well, that's not fair. This clown, Wong, is going to appear Thursday to say that the record of achievement from appointed boards is better than elected boards. You can bet that he wasn't told to be neutral. From a third-rate Ivy League wannabe, I guess because experts from Yale and Harvard weren't available to say that hybrid boards are better than elected boards. And I'm quoting the Post-Dispatch what Wong is going to say Thursday, based on their article today. My next point, the fix is in my opinion, for a recommendation of a hybrid board. So everybody ought to take all their spare change and find a good book they trust and bet that the recommendation is going to be for a hybrid board. My next point is to address the canard as perpetuated by the Post-Dispatch for 15 years, that the takeover was due to problems with the elected board. Turnover in superintendents was the result of the Slay slate. Bad finances were the result of the fall off in state revenues. Bad achievement was the result of the Slay slate, which took us from within 2 points of full accreditation to 2 points of unaccredited. And the president of that board was Darnetta Clinkscale, who, my friend, who's no longer speaking to me, with good reason, I think, who's now back on the SAB. Reagan used to say that government wasn't the solution to the problem, government was the problem. Appointed boards aren't the solution to the problem, appointed boards are the problem. Scores under the SAB...
26 seconds.
Yes, sir. Have been essentially flat for 10 years, and anybody who tells you differently is incorrect. Finally, the task force, you may know, it doesn't matter what you think. Gaines and Sullivan are going to make the recommendation. They can ignore you, they can ignore the experts. Don't let yourself be used. Make your own recommendation and stand firm. And my final point is, when there are no hybrid and takeovers among white middle-class districts, there's no good way to spin that other than people don't trust people of color and people in the city to run their own schools, and that's a disgrace.
Your
and
time
for
has...
two people to make a recommendation of the future of St. Louis schools, that's a disgrace too. Thank you.
Your
for
time
the
has elapsed. Katie Berry, Bruce Franks, William Grun, and Megan Betts.
Are the mics on? Okay.
And after that, we will conclude.
Are the mics on?
I think yours is on. Yours is on.
I can talk really loud. So first, I just want to say that, I was impressed to see several students come up here and make their voices be heard. And then I was pretty disappointed that they seemed to be kind of not even spoken to or addressed. There were questions, people had to stand up to get their questions answered. And even then, the answer was addressed to Mr. Haas, not to the kids. And I think that's pretty shameful. So it is about the kids. And my name's Katie Berry. My son is a 3-year-old at 6. And I just want to say that I have seen as a St. Louis resident, Jefferson City's overreach into St. Louis. And I'm kind of getting tired of Jefferson City and the politicians there, you know, present company excluded, some of you, overreaching into St. Louis. They're wanting to send their police officers to St. Louis. They're wanting to take away our pay increases. They're wanting to talk about what jobs women can have, and discrimination against women. And I am not ready to give my schools to them too. So that's my first point. My second point is that I raised my son to be politically engaged. He may only be 3, but he's met his state representative before. He comes with me every time I vote. He's disappointed because there's a playground next door. But to show up and tell him, like, I take you to vote with me, but you know what? These folks are going to take your voice away, and they're taking my voice away with the thing that impacts you the most at your age. That is your education. And lastly, I just want to point out, because I know I'm short on time, though mine might have been cut into, that when we are building our prisons based on 3rd grade reading levels in this country, there is a problem. And right now, your all's decision is impacting the lives and of our students and who they will become, and the violence that will happen in our city 15 years from now. The money we're supposed to spend on police 15 years from now is all going to be affected by the decisions you all make. And so, you know what? I appreciate your surveys. My last point, I appreciate your sending surveys out, but I would prefer a vote.
30 seconds. No, we're trying to get out of here and get this done. So she responded to special things.
So I'm Bruce Franks, state representative of the 78th district, right next door. I thank my colleague, Representative Butler, for some of his remarks, as well as everybody else, but the most important remarks I heard was from the 2 children about how they want to be engaged. And I think that talking about a student task force and implementing students would be great. It's needed, period. I would much rather have the student task force than the task force up there. And that's with respects to a couple people up there who I know and have worked with. What I will say as a politician, I am tired of politics in our schools, period. As a politician, I wholeheartedly support returning power back to where it needs to be with our elected board. As a protesting politician, what I will say is that the sentiments of my brother, Vashon Aldridge, if it's not returned, it will be issues in the city. It will be continued on top of continued, because we protest for everything. So we definitely gonna protest for our children. The law says it. So us even being here right now, is truly a waste, because the people selected who they needed to select, who they wanted to select. And about your surveys, your couple thousand surveys that we've sent out, that you've sent out, not me, we've gotten so disenfranchised, disengaged with the community that we don't know how to reach out to folks, because you got folks that have all type of challenges and barriers that's not worrying about them surveys, because the state let the Republicans in the state took back the minimum wage. So now they working a couple extra hours. So if they overlook that survey, their fault, you know. But now you're basically saying the same thing that the Republicans said when we put something in place, put a law in place and say this is what's supposed to happen. You basically show up and say, psych, I lied. And that's not okay to the disenfranchised community. Mic check. Mic check. Say ah!
Mr. William Groon.
I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward for a number of years, and the voter turnout is so poor, I was wondering if anyone has examined the quality of news coverage and voter turnout, the well-being of a neighborhood, and, for instance, school performance. Many municipalities have their own papers. The local news is offensively poor. So what correlation between news coverage and well-being is there?
Any questions that are not directed towards the speakers who came before you, we will attempt to answer at a later time. We have 2 more people who we will hear from. Megan Betts.
I do have a question, and I think you should probably be able to answer this one. How much is this costing?
The total, this will be the last one. The total amount for the process will be approximately $75,000 to $80,000.
And where is that money coming from?
It's coming from the board, the school board.
Okay, thank you. So $80,000 for a law that already exists to say go back to, I just want it to be put out there that we're spending up to $80,000, and who is that money going to? Because you all are volunteers, correct? You're not getting a dime. Who up here is getting paid?
There is no one on this stage that's being paid. MSBA has come here, the people you see here came on their own dime. None of us are being paid. I'm going to answer that, only because I don't know that we have a true understanding of what this process is about. We don't make the decision. We make a recommendation. Our recommendation is to DESE. DESE makes a decision based on our recommendation. If you would like to make recommendations, you have the opportunity to make your recommendation. We believed that this community needed to hear the process that's been developed by 781 to address the issue of the SAB going away and a new form of governance being put in place. We will make a recommendation, and we were doing that in such a manner that it would be done consistent with the state legislature being in session. DESE has asked us to stay until 2019. We have asked that we try and create a process whereby the decision from DESE could be made prior to that. If DESE makes a decision in January or between January and April, they would be able then, depending on whatever their quote position is, if it is something other than to return the school system to the elected board, it would require legislation. There would be an opportunity for that to be done this year as opposed to next year at the earliest. So I think it needs to be understood that the process here is simply to make a recommendation to DESE, but to be done in such a way that we involve as many people in this community as possible in terms of understanding that structure and the recommendation. That is all this process is about. And I think it's important that it be understood that we do not determine for DESE what that decision shall be. We're going to have 2 more questions, and there will be no more accepted at this meeting. However, this Thursday at Central Visual and Performing Arts School, we will then address the issue of appointed boards. The notion of these meetings is for the community to understand how different boards govern, what the strengths and the weaknesses of those governance methods are. That's all this is about. Now, it's becoming something else, but that's all that this is about. The process is to inform this community. This is the way different boards govern. The next person would be Megan Betts. We have one left in, and I cannot read this well. I think it's Obra Holmes. Clara Holmes.
Transforming Our People is my organization that I created. How you doing?
How are you?
I just had a couple questions to ask. By me being a person out here in the community, out here in the streets. My daughter go to Hawthorne, all-girls school on Kings Highway, Cobrinha. And I know that's a fabulous school. I love Hawthorne. But I wish that we had more mentors into the school because a lot of kids have got personal issues going on. And when they come into the school, they not doing what they supposed to do. You know, they aggravated, they can't sit still. And I wish they get more mentors into the schools. They don't have mentors like they used to. And I wish that the question I'd like to ask is, what are they gonna do with all these schools that's standing there? Like I found out one school been sitting there for 20 years, just sitting there. Embarrassing. We just looking at all, that's the school I used to go to, all this just sitting there, they ain't doing nothing with it. And the third question I like to ask, I know a reverend who tried to buy a school to make it out of a shelter. And they gave him a hard time, that's Timmy School, Reverend Frazier. In St. Louis Avenue, Lambda, he wanted to make that school out of a shelter, and they don't want a shelter in North City. He wanted to make that building out of something. They gave him a hard time. So that's the three questions I wanted to ask.
Yes, ma'am. This forum tonight is basically to ask questions and give comments on the different forms of governance. That question would probably best be asked at a regular school board meeting where we could take that up as a body. The SAB could take that up. And we give answers to all questions that are asked in those meetings.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Richard. Are there any other comments from our panel of presenters? In finalizing the first session, the next session will be held at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School, and it will be this Thursday starting at 6:30. It will talk about appointed boards. Again, the aim of this is to basically help this community understand the different strengths and weaknesses of different forms of governance. Thank you so much for coming. See some of you Thursday, and others we will see possibly next Monday at Northwest High School. We're done. You have to be a unique child. I'm gone. Yes, you do.